Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Engagement Appeals launch session. So this is the morning Cuppa with our special guest, Dr. David Coe, and we have Wilfred Louwsma as well. So I will go to these guys very shortly. They have some very interesting insights with regard to engagement, of course, climate, and proxy voting, which is entirely pertinent given that it's still AGM season, as you could probably see in some of our faces. So firstly, about the engagement appeal, I won't talk much over the session because I do want to give the platform to these two colleagues here. But the engagement appeal is an initiative that has been undertaken over the last 14 months, so quietly in the background. Ultimately, what had happened over these months is a group of individuals have come together trying to think about solutions for engaging more inclusively. So I was actually in Cambridge last year around this time, and I was contacted by a partner of Mishkan Dareya who wanted to just to think about ways of being more inclusive and having retail shareholders included in engagement in order to represent public good to companies and activist investors. And basically, that conversation led to more people joining us. So we had the CEO of Share Action, Tumelo Tulip Share, joined the group, a director of Edelman, and the co-authors of the Unsustainable Truth, and then brought in Board Agenda. And then I had the fortune of meeting Professor Oliver Hart, also in Cambridge, and I pretty much ran after him and asked him, Professor, may I take some of your time to discuss the work that we're doing about inclusive investor engagement? And lo and behold, it was very much within his sweet spot, within his research. And he also has become part of the engagement appeal. And then we expanded that further to also include listed companies. So we're very fortunate to have members appeal Hunt within our informal committee, corporate governance member from BP, and some other amazing colleagues whose backgrounds are in non-executive directorship. So basically, it's a very interesting time. The informal discussion then led to being more formalized and turned into a white paper. So over the time that we were engaging with one another, trying to come up with solutions, we realized that we need to write this down. And in the process of writing things down, we were able to basically assess the fitness of what we were trying to do. And what came to light in November at a very important session, I remember the day, the 29th of November, basically we proposed some ideas around inclusive investor engagement and how to make that happen. And in that session, it was the first time we actually had a listed company CEO. And he and the whole discussion made us think about looking at the situation from more than just one perspective. And basically, from there, we realized that it's so much more important, at least at this juncture, to look at constructivism as opposed to immediately hard activism. So there is a place for activism, we know that, but maybe I'm mellowing with age. But basically, constructivism, collaboration, including intergenerational collaboration, we believe is important for good engagement, which leads to mutual understanding. So that's where we are today with the with the thought process and the white paper, and taking that just one more step further, we didn't want to just stop at words. We want to deliver positive impact. And so a group of us within the team determined that we need to have an organization to actually affect positive change. And so came about the engagement appeal, the social venture, and we're setting out to affect the change that we have been discussing by having all the listed companies sign up to this, as well as 1 million individuals sign up to inclusive investor engagement by December 2025. And 1 million sounds like a lot. I love it that our sponsor, Morrow Sodali, when I said 1 million, they said, oh, just 1 million? Why not 5? I love that attitude, because in the UK, we think that there's up to possibly 40 million individual investors who hold shares directly through nominees and through pension funds. So basically, 1 million is probably achievable, especially when we start looking at the different organizations that are out there who are trying to do similar things to what we're doing. So David is being beckoned by his publisher, probably.
I'm not sure who's by, but it's on.
Which is perfect timing to go to David and to Wilfred. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors for helping make this happen. And without further ado, I'm going to move over to David and Wilfred. We will be focusing on engagement versus divestment and the AGM season, zooming in on proxy voting. So why don't I let you guys introduce yourselves?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my name's David. I started off life as a physicist, as an academic. I was a researcher and had a lectureship at Oxford. And then my girlfriend at the time was studying Japanese, finished a degree and thought, I got to go there and find a job. It's back in '94. Telephone bills were incredibly expensive. Academic career then didn't pay for the phone bills, so I ended up in the investment industry. That was over 30 years ago. And I stayed in the investment industry, working with hedge funds, essentially with pensions, endowments, and sovereign wealth funds, as I was explaining earlier, as kind of the clients, and have seen all the different aspects of the investment industry. And a few years back, my colleague and I, who I believe he's online, is unable to join us physically today, was looking into sustainable investing. And it prompted us to leave the industry because of two things. One was that we were convinced there was an issue with sustainability. And the second was that deep inside, we recognize, as I think you were describing earlier, when you get a lot of money involved, when you get over $100 trillion involved in the world, looking for some way to maintain its presence, whether it's even just against inflation, let alone the fact that you want it to provide for you, each of us individually, into our future, you ultimately demand huge amounts on the planet. And it's driven essentially by a model that says we could always get that from the planet, which worked until more people got involved and more people with similar aspirations got involved and all the rest. So we left the industry. And we left the industry not because we don't believe in investments, we do. We left the industry first because we had to figure out what it all meant for ourselves, get our thoughts clear, and also because we wanted to be able to speak. And one of the most important things we felt that wasn't spoken to at the time with ESG and all those things is that the G, the governance, is really the most important thing. And the way the governance is viewed is simply about checkboxing whether the management has oversight from a board. But true governance, it goes back to an advert I remember seeing back in probably late 80s, where there was this guy with a razor. And he says, it was so good I bought the company, basically. It's that part where you own it because you believe in it and you want it to do things in your name. And that's that essence of governance. And that's where individual investors are really important, because what we had also found as we were doing our research in sustainable investing was that the number of public companies is diminishing. Mm. They are being taken over to be private. And this private comes on the back of pensions who have more private equity and private debt investing in that way, but they're still going private. And that means that the broad population has less and less say over how they actually want their products to be. There's less opportunity to be genuinely saying, I love that so much, I bought the company. Mm-hmm. And if we don't keep our companies public, we're going to find that we will revert back to an age where our economies are dictated to us, and we are stuck in there. So with divestment, this leads very naturally to that, which is simply that when you divest, you're kind of giving up that last bit of control which you feel you have, but you don't actually know how to express. Engagement is to say the opposite. Engagement is to say, how do I amplify this part of control that I do have? How do I go through that? And very importantly, a strong part of engagement is not about engaging just on specific topics. It is engaging on a vision of that future. And then go from there to come back and then say, what does that mean about the topics we should be engaging on today? So there's a very simple example with divesting. Everybody's talking about divesting away from oil and gas and coal companies. And if we start from a vision of that future and that path towards it, what we actually see is the energy deficit. The reality of it is that you're not going to have enough energy capacity to replace everything along if you're genuinely going to do that. So if I'm looking at that, and then I'm going to go along and say, how do I then deal with that, with the company I own, that whose razors I so love, that I bought the company? What you're left with is actually to say, what can I not do, which I don't need to do, so that I can make things better, as opposed to what do I do to solve the problems I see to make things better. Interesting. That's an idea of subtractive change. There's a paper in Nature magazine back in April 2021 that talked about how people systematically miss subtractive change. And there's reason for it, because you don't get paid by not doing something, even if that's the better thing to do. So our whole economics is set up on a path to promote us to solve problems by looking for an alternative, adding a layer, as opposed to simply saying, what do I not do? And as far as engagement is concerned, if you care about the company that you have, what you really want to do is to know how, as cost of living increases, and cost of living is for us fundamentally a climate problem. China just reported massive blight on their crops because unseasonal rain came just before harvest. That will push up food prices ahead for everyone. How do you then face those sort of things, knowing that your company is going to be able to still going to be able to make a profit for you as the owner? And what you end up going to is you end up having to engage by saying, what are the things that in the world we see ahead, we want and need? How does that mean for what we actually produce and how we go about it? And that's a different mode of engagement. It's a mode of engagement that actually addresses how do we see the future and our needs, and how do we make sure that good businesses meet them. If you have a good business, you meet them. A bad business creates a product that it thinks it can sell and then pushes it out as fast as it can. That's the engagement model that says I'm going to use all form of media to try and promote it along. And as long as I get my investors along the way, I'll go some way towards that and hope that I can outrun every other problem along the way. So for us, the problem with divesting is really going back to thinking, what is that future? How do I wrap myself back from there to what other points I actually want to engage in now?
David, thank you so much for that. I have read your book at least twice, and we do. It is incredibly fascinating in that what you understand on the surface is not necessarily the reality. I've got a question for you, which I would also like to pose to Wilfred, and then Wilfred, if you can do a 5-minute intro as well, or thereabouts. But David, would you say that retail shareholders presently are engaged or unengaged? And I will relate that to protesters against oil, for example. I often think that the protesters involved probably hold shares through pensions in the companies that they're protesting. So firstly, would you say they're engaged or unengaged in general, retail shareholders? And I'll pose this to you as well.
I think there's a difference between a internal engagement in thinking I care about these things, and a practical engagement of how do I reach constructively a dialogue with a company. So I think retail shareholders are generally internally engaged in that way, but we're very poor at that practical engagement of how do we actually talk and share our ideas with the company. How do we become the owner that says, I love this profit, I bought the company. I don't think we're very good at that part.
Okay, I have some thoughts as well, which I will share with you guys. Wilfred, what do you think? You're a proxy voting specialist.
Yes. Let me just quickly introduce myself and the company that I work for. And I think it relates to some of the things that David said as well earlier. So my name is Wilfred Louwsma. I'm Director of Project Management and Business Change within Broadridge. Broadridge is the largest provider of corporate governance services in the world, most likely. I don't have the exact figures, but it's a fairly safe statement. Broadridge is, I think, one of the companies that everyone deals with if they're a shareholder, but nobody really sees. So we do, in our governance services, we do everything around ESG, we do shareholder disclosure, and we do proxy voting services, and we do the full gamut. So we have voting platforms for retail institutional shareholders. We run the pipelines for global custodians and local custodians in the markets. So we are really about making connections between shareholders on the one hand and the issuers on the other. And yes, so Broadridge is really about making connections, about shareholder democratizations. So we will work as hard to get votes in for retail shareholders as we do for pension funds. We're completely agnostic in that. Further to what David was saying, I'm a shareholder in Broadridge. So I love the company I work for so much that I want to own it. And then coming back to your question about shareholder engagement, I think shareholders are engaged, really depending, but there's some caveats there. So it should be easy for shareholders to submit their votes. So the technology is already there. It's just not widely adopted enough, especially around the retail space. And when we see that there is really a low threshold solution or opportunity for them to vote or attend meetings, retail shareholders will vote, and especially for subject matters that are really, really important to them, like climate change, board remuneration, etc., etc. Just to give you an example, like a standard meeting will see about 5% return on retail shareholder votes. But if it's an important subject like climate change, we'll see up to 40%, which is massive.
That's very interesting, Wilfred. And so just firstly, with regard to Broadridge, I'm so glad that you're here. And thank you for reaching out. I think we're a diverse and inclusive platform, the engagement appeal. And we discussed about the incumbent being Broadridge and that how important it is for the market to actually understand a bit more about who it is, what you guys do. So it's good to be able to demystify. Of course, we support innovation, and it would be great to hear a bit more about the innovations that you are undertaking. With regard to retail being engaged or unengaged, I think this is a really interesting topic because at the engagement appeal at T, we're pounding the pavement to the corporates to get their buy-in to do this, right? And a pushback is that retail is not engaged. And we have put out a poll today that shows that the younger generation at present feel like they're being valued by companies, which is very surprising. And I think it relates to what you were saying earlier about companies being savvy and using whatever is available to them to flog their wares. And if you think about this, over the last 20 years, there has been a significant democratization of the buying and selling of shares, but that hasn't kept up on the engagement side. And then again, on intergenerational, why it's important, based on the research we have undertaken for the white paper and just continuously, it would appear that the older generation are very interested in traditional performance metrics, hence their attendance at AGMs. The younger generation tend to be more ESG, I know you hate that term, tend to be more ESG, sustainability focused, but they don't know what platform or what to go through to engage on that. So then they vent in different ways. So I think it's important to understand the different behaviors. So I guess, your thoughts on that, and perhaps in addition to what we just mentioned, the biggest barriers to inclusive investor engagement, and then your thoughts on stats that you're seeing at the moment for AGM season. Wilfred, so the biggest barriers to engagement, do you think, David?
Well, that's one of the things which is actually quite disconcerting is this sort of growth of guerrilla investors who basically try to go about agendas on sort of item basis and essentially become shareholders to then take over that agenda, push it on through, leave. And that's extremely damaging to companies because things as all kinds, if you imagine growing your garden and allowing it to mature, that's basically takes a decade to get it going from where you are. And someone might come in and actually says, I don't really like the fact that, you plant your trees in that way and so on and rip them up or do whatever else it is. They probably won't be ripping them up, but maybe planting them somewhere else and go away, and then ignoring the fact that actually there are reasons why they're there and they don't actually grow in the other places and all those things. So those sort of approaches can become very attractive for people to think I'm engaging, but it isn't actual engagement. Engagement is basically asking how long are you going to be there for first, Do you actually have some sense of a vision that you might be? And from the company side, it goes the other way around. We do market research all the time. How about your own ownership group, your own individual shareholder ownership group as your marketing pitch? How do they respond to your products? And you have the greatest resource within a company's reach, which is all the individual owners that they have, because they've bought it because they care about it.
Mm.
So why not ask them first, which they don't do?
Some companies might say they do.
But they do, in the sense they think that's what it is. This isn't quite that sort of thing. This is really about Henry Ford with his Model T car, right? It was black. It turned out it was black because that was the model that sold most. It first came in many different colors. But who do you reach to in doing those things? Who is really your market research about? So that's how you get the sense of what your owners actually want for those products. And if you do that, adding on to it their ability to educate you about the vision of the future they have.
Completely agreed. And I will ask, but that's great. I think institutional investors and retail shareholders. So in companies' defenses, they will say, well, we do. We engage with our shareholders. We engage with 90% of our issued share capital, which happens to be 10% of the lines on the register. So, but what you're saying is diversify that process to be more inclusive of all shareholders' views.
Look through it, because when you are the young people in the room, so I'm pointing to them. You started. The government requires you to commit money into a pension. That pension is towards a future for you. What that shape of that future for you is going to be predicated on whether you believe you need to keep working even when you get to 90, or whether you think you can still retire at 64 if you're in France and live off that pension for whatever time. Which choice do you want to choose? That determines the picture of the products that you think the companies in your pensions ought to be focused on. The picture of the environment and those products and those sort of things that they may be. So reaching beyond the headline shareholder, because behind the headline pensions are people.
Over to you, because
Yes.
effectively we're talking about pass-through voting now.
There's a couple of things, right? Yeah. You're talking about, first question was the barriers that we see at the moment.
Yes.
And the barriers we see at Broadridge aren't really technological. So I think, within the industry, there's enough technology to really aid both shareholders and issuers to engage fully with their shareholders. A lot of it is about regulations, really. I'll start giving you some stats, right? So we've seen an enormous increase in appetite within the market, so investors, in ESG products. We've done some research, and we expect actually the ESG products to be about 30 trillion in size by 2030. So that's it's a big chunk, right? And the regulator also sees that, and it's really driven them in changing regulations. So I think the past years, there's 900 individual ESG regulation been implemented worldwide. There's another 70 in the pipeline. The largest that's impacting us here in Europe was SRD2, Shareholder Rights Directive, which was quite unique because it mandated issuers to put certain resolutions on the agenda that are important, like remuneration. But it also mandated intermediaries, so the custodians, the brokers, to inform shareholders of meetings and also allow them to vote, which we haven't seen before. that's where it kind of gets tricky, right? Because how do you define shareholder? And because the Shareholder Rights Directive is a directive, it gave some leeway to individual countries to define it themselves. So I'll give you a quick example. So, for example, in the UK, shareholder is defined as the member on the register of members of the company. So that's basically where the information flow stops, and nothing has to be cascaded down. Obviously, there's some brokers who see that they've got clients who want to vote at shareholder meetings, so they will allow it, but not all of them will do. However, in other countries where shareholder is defined as the ultimate beneficial owner of shares, the same UK broker will have to provide their clients the possibility to vote. And you get to these really weird situations that if you are holding shares in a German company, your UK broker will allow you to vote, no issue, but you won't get informed by a UK or for a UK meeting, which is probably the bulk of your investments.
I'm going to pick on a point here. So thank you for all those stats, by the way, really helpful. In regard to what you said earlier, there is enough tech in the market. Okay, so I'd like you to expand on that, please, Wilfred. So number one, and just to be slightly controversial, a key gripe that's vocalized by market participants with Broadridge is the votes don't get to the registrar until 48 hours or 24 hours before the proxy voting deadline, that you guys sit on it. And as a proxy consultant myself, that's so stressful and frustrating. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And in my view, this is why there's other tech that is being developed. And then the second point would be around Archie Norman, the M&S chair. I don't know if you guys have been following, but he's been doing a great job of vocalizing the need for greater retail shareholder democracy. I think he believes that there should be one central tech. So what do you think about those two things?
So let's start with the first question around why we lodge our votes when we do. So
I want real time.
Everyone wants real time. However, there are certain costs involved as well for our clients. So when we vote into like sub-custodians for our clients incur costs, a small one from us, also processing costs from their local sub-custodians, which is perceived to be prohibitive. There's other considerations, like if I vote shares 3 weeks before the meeting, there's still trading going on. There's constant adjustment, which makes it really, really tricky from a standpoint of vote rejections. So that there's some risk there, which makes it really, really tricky. But just to go back to that. So SRD2 really mandated vote without delay. So that's something that we developed within our product suite, saying, okay, this is something that we need to do. So back in 2019, it was really one of the first enhancements that we implemented within our products, saying like, okay, we've got vote without delay now. As soon as an instruction comes in, we can relay it to the registrar, the issuer, or whoever we voted into. Our clients looked at it and said, this doesn't really work for us. So vote without delay, to get the vote actual physically at the registrar, our clients don't want it.
What?
Because? Really because of those considerations, like there's trade settlement, there's costs that they have to pay for their sub-custodians, which, every time you change something, you incur an additional cost.
Okay.
And there's also different ways that you can get the same visibility, right? You don't actually have to have those votes physically at the registrar to have visibility as an issuer.
How do you get visibility then?
So that there's different products in the market. I know competitors in Ireland, similar situation as in the UK, where shareholder is defined as the member on the register of members of the company, will allow issuers to look into their voting systems to see the votes that are in there. So you can give, Broadridge has a similar product. We've had that for years, where issuers can look into our system and can see all the votes that are in the pipeline at a resolution level. At the moment there's some limited visibility because not all of our custodian clients want to give that full visibility. So we have to respect that. But that is out there, and we feel that wherever the votes are in the pipeline, if you have that visibility, there's already a lot of risk that you can reduce at an issuer level to get those resolutions passed. And also when you're in corporate governance advisory, you can also use those stats to proactively start engaging with investors.
Fascinating.
And just to add to that point, not all, specifically institutional investors, want to be engaged with during proxy season.
Is that about being flexible with democracy?
Well, if I think about electoral campaigns and exit posts and things like that, your party goes around and they call on you and they say, "Have you voted?" They do that. This is part of this idea that you do have a representation and you're supposed to be able to use it. And this idea that somehow it might be used and therefore we shouldn't allow it would meet great rebellion from that kind of electoral politics, right?
Not really. So it's not like we don't allow people to vote. They still can vote.
No, but that visibility becoming a problem, because having that visibility may mean you're almost near there, and therefore a little push might help you along. That sort of idea to then go along and say, well, you can't do that.
The company needs its 2/3 votes to get something through.
Yeah,
brings up and nags the people that haven't voted.
Well, it works both ways, right? The incumbent party or the opposition, whichever it might be, engagement cuts both ways through. It is to give voice.
I think you're doing really well relaying facts and thank you for that. Ultimately, for me, as a proxy voting nerd and as a shareholder engagement advocator, I think what's really needed is demystification. So the proxy voting, the custodial chain, the proxy voting pipe is really funky. It's so complicated. It actually took me 2 years to get my head around it. And there are new technologies available. Of course, there's proximity. There's Chimelo, who are delving into pass-through voting, and there's more that's being developed. And Broadridge has the place as the incumbent, and I know you guys are doing a lot of development. But I think just for all of you guys, some clarity for us normal people to understand the proxy voting process, and then to the points that Martin and yourself, David, are making. The costs associated to what you're saying, it can be enormous. In Canada, when I was 19, I did proxy solicitation calls to retail shareholders. I'm calling on behalf of Oppenheimer funds or whatever other fund. And basically those campaigns costed about $3 million because the company had to solicit proxy votes in order to reach quorum to have their meeting. So I think it's about balancing, costs versus the return on those costs.
Well, I think for company to do that again goes down to the governance, right? As owners, do we want to condone our company spending that money to do that?
Yes, and so just having that discussion in the first instance, again, to that point that we were discussing early on with the white paper, is that simple question is, do companies know what shareholders want? And Professor Oliver Hart that's a premise of his research is, do companies know what shareholders want? And if they know what shareholders want, they should act on it. My view, I don't know what your view is. Do you guys think that that companies know what shareholders want?
I'm going to bounce back inevitably to the Archie Norman campaign. He's trying to get the law changed so the company can choose between physical, digital, or online. That puts us at risk of going digital only. If we go digital only, that meeting a year where the investors can go in and meet the management properly face to face will go. I think that's a really important layer of governance which will move away. And I think that the physical AGM should be encouraged an awful lot more as an anchor, supported digitally, to really get that shareholder opinion better.
Let's hear your views on that, gentlemen.
Yeah, can I just reach back slightly where you said that the proxy voting pipeline should be simplified? I agree with that, but the proxy voting pipeline is a byproduct of trading, right?
Yeah.
So and trade settlement. So it's not, proxy voting is not a process in itself. So why things are complicated is because of the structures that have been put in place to facilitate trading.
Decentralize it. Blockchain. What do you think?
I think blockchain is interesting, but it has a lot of drawbacks as well, specifically around speed of processing. From an audit perspective, blockchain is amazing. But if you put like massive volumes through it, blockchain generally stops working. There's also some real considerations around energy usage. I think when you look at Bitcoin, the amount of energy that it takes nowadays to mine one Bitcoin is
that's Bitcoin for Ethereum. It uses like less than less than YouTube.
Exactly, but there's different consideration, and most of it is just scalability. So if massive volumes go through blockchain, it kind of stops working. And when it comes to decentralizing things, there has to be books and records available, so there has to be proof that you're a shareholder. I know, within the digital age, it is easier nowadays. So I agree that we could do everything digitally nowadays. So harking back on regulations that are real big barriers. So that there's we're active in 100 markets, right? Mm-hmm. We have to deal with so many different processes within markets. So there's share registration in Switzerland, which is a barrier to shareholder participation. Some markets require paper POAs to be signed at an event-specific level, which is a massive barrier to shareholder participation. So just technology won't work because you can put stuff on blockchain. But if at the end, for a vote to be counted, you still have to present this event-specific POA, it doesn't work, and no provider will have a solution for that.
Might not the discussions that we're having now lead to the question, how from first principles do you think this should work? And if you like, design something from first principles. And I have a feeling where you've got a complicated market with lots of participants, they aren't going to vote for simplification because you don't need as many of these. In other words, people currently involved in it, if they're the only people you talk to, you're never going to be told if you like the full truth.
I think there's a part along those lines. We in our book we talked a little bit about an exercise that was done in a village in Japan, and they were planning about how to make their village sustainable for the future. And the exercise became this category of reimagining the future. What they did is they invited population from 2040 to join them. They created this population from 2040. This population lived as a population from 2040 for a while, so that they came back speaking as a population from 2040. And they had to learn how to speak and change tense and all those things. And they did that because what they realized is when you have discussions like this, inevitably you fixate on the problems we see today. In their case, it ended up being to recycle the rubbish, to receive this or that. What came out of that was conversations that I'm so glad we can still see the mountains, because that meant that the property development project they were thinking of, which would have put solar panels on and did everything to be sustainable, never went through. You do not get to where you actually want to be from the hurdles of today, because, as you're saying, they bind you to solutions within the space you are in.
There's another way you can look at it, which is the past. When we founded the UK Shareholder Association, there weren't really any nominee accounts. At that point, everybody's name was on the register. You could even request the register and contact the other people if you wanted to. That was a powerful bit of democracy. There's issues with it, but nevertheless, the point was everybody had a relationship with the company. Then along comes the nominee account. And at that point, you're disenfranchised. And the solution, the very obvious solution, is that each shareholder and nominee shows up on the company register as two items: underlying owner, contactable, talkable, talk to about whatever, and legal owner, trustee if you like. So dual name on register, that puts the job straight back to the registrars of the company. You don't need anybody else. Now there's a little bit of an issue around dual name on register. It means that the people who are looking after the shares can't go and stop lending the bloody things, because the name on register would change. So having your name on the register is a bit more security. You won't get defrauded out of your ownership. But name on register, dual name on register, is a solution we would like to see.
And I think it's worth exploring all these different ideas. Again, to the point about the significant democratization of buying and selling. So intermediation obviously has its benefits, but then it also has its downside when it comes to proxy voting and engagement. So I'm just conscious of time. I'd like to get your thoughts on digital versus in-person versus hybrid. What is best, in your opinion, for AGMs, and why?
Well, I have to say, you just have to talk from the present experience of being here in a room with people, and our engagement is completely different to the ones who are watching on the screen, and totally different from the ones who will be watching the recording along. Our actual mental and physical engagement in that very basic sense is different. Take that away and we don't care anymore.
Okay, so is that for physical only or hybrid?
Whichever form that you end up with, you have to realize that we are always still physical beings.
Okay.
So do you see it as keeping the physical anchor?
That physical anchor is really important. If you want to show me a car, I want to sit in it.
Okay. An objection you're going to get, and it's about costs again, but I get it. How about you, proxy voting expert?
So we have a hybrid solution that we currently use in the States, which we see a lot of additional retail participation on. So really the hybrids or full virtual really sees a lot of benefits for retail shareholders, and we see a lot more engagement. We see a lot more questions being asked to the company even before the meeting starts. That can be answered before meeting, before the meeting commences. So that's really, really good. But it's ultimately the choice of the issuer and how they want to engage with their shareholders. Personally, I really like the physical component, but to have that augmented with a virtual element, so really have that hybrid meeting, I think that will give you best of both worlds.
And it's not even a new thing, this whole kind of hybrid. In the 80s, didn't they used to live stream AGMs? But arguably, other markets could look at the UK as dinosaurs because in Scandinavia, digital is legal. So I think, again, this is another area that needs to be debated.
Yeah. But also, within the UK, that there's also some legal barriers that you have to overcome when it comes to the representation at the meeting, because you have to prove that you're a shareholder. So that's something that makes it a bit trickier. However, if an issuer really wants to, they can overcome that by just accepting.
I think today
accepting those votes, right?
Yeah,
and even at the moment, we're working on a POC with a large UK issuer to really provide both virtual attendance and voting rights.
If I can go to Glastonbury and prove that I've got a ticket for it, I'm sure.
Over the years, we used to, Paul Miners used to talk to us quite a bit. Quite supportive of the retail investor having the voice. And I remember one of the sessions he said, perhaps I shouldn't be telling you this, but you may not have many votes, but you'd be amazed at the impact you have on a board when you ask a question, physical AGM. This is about calling people to account. And in a way, it's the shareholder's company. So why should it be the issuer that chooses how things run? It should be the shareholders. And in practice, shareholders want hybrid. You've got people who want to go in person, and you've got people who either couldn't afford to, haven't got the time, etc., to go physically. So I think a hybrid it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Well,
I think also that having associations like the UK Shareholder Association, it would be good if the UK Shareholder Association did have a representative as many AGMs as possible, so it could speak that voice in the physical domain.
Yeah, there's a different discussion which maybe happen later on today, but we're talking about shareholders who say, I bought that share. We're also talking about indirect shareholders who may not even be aware they're a member of a pension scheme. They have an interest. But for there to be, and we know people like the idea of ESG simply because people want to be involved in something that's doing good. They don't really know what it's about, but they'd rather have something good than bad, and so they tick that box. But we lack any deep thinking about principles of governance. How would you like a company to be run if you knew you were going to own it forever in your family? How would you treat the people? How would you be interested in profits and share prices? You wouldn't be much. How would you pay people? Well, you wouldn't give a share of the company away. No way. So that sort of thinking is desperately needed.
That stronger bond between the shareholder and the company is really important as well, to stop this buying and selling, to really invest truly in a company.
So and that sort of thinking can bring in people who are not direct shareholders. What are the principles that you'd like your passive owners, your passive managers, because most intelligent people use passive because actives underperforms. How would you like your passive people to vote in terms of principles for how companies should run? Way more than just ESG, much more thoughtful.
Okay, well, we've got some amazing insights around the table. We've got 4 minutes left, I think. So either another last question from the floor or closing statements from...
Is there anyone online who's got...
That's right. Looks like there's any questions. Are there questions here? Let's see.
We have here an evening
Oh, we are
meetings.
Okay. No. Any questions from the web?
That's a classic example of a hybrid where the people in the physical have the conversation and the people in the hybrid are, oh, let's just check what they have to say.
There is a problem with online meetings where if you want to ask a challenging question, the person controlling the meeting can edit you out. It's a terrible problem.
I've seen it with we have good intentions today. We're a little bit lumpy on the technology, which I take full account for. I was at the Aberdeen meeting recently, and they took all the questions from the floor brilliantly, including the activists. They asked the questions, beautiful. But with the best will in the world, the person on the laptop paraphrases just a touch. Just a touch, and it's not deliberate. It's just how we operate as people. It's trying to get the question out, and it's meant well, but it happens. Whereas the person in the floor, in the room, asks the true question. You know,
or waffles on for ages.
Well, there was some there was some additional words which weren't necessarily required. Could have been trimmed down a touch, but there we are.
So I just want to finish by going back to the beginning about divesting, which is if you get into a situation where you really feel that you need to divest, then just ask yourself, is the person buying it going to be more aligned with your thinking? And ask yourself then, if you don't actually think that's the case, what does it cost you to just hold it and actually try to engage?
So does it go in private concern you?
It does really, massively.
So we've got to keep hold of these things and prevent.
Carlos Slim just bought a whole chunk of Mexican oil. He is not buying it to reduce his production in any way.
No.
And it's gone away into a set of private hands. There are enough private money around to keep us in trouble for a very long time.
Okay, so your view is public companies are better than private.
Public companies allow you to know that whatever happens, we are together in our choices that we've made to it. We could still all go to hell in a handbasket, but it's our choice.
The choice we seem to be making.
Wilfred, final statement from you.
Final statement is, I think, engagement is all about building connections, right? Whether it's in person or whether it's digital connections between shareholders and companies. But just building those connections isn't enough. You really have to have like almost a three-pronged approach to it, where you, in addition to really providing the technology, you also have to have a conversation with regulators to make sure that they organize, the whole ecosystem in such a way that it's beneficial for shareholders and issuers to be able to have that conversation. And you also have to really manage your network to make sure that you just proactively really just remove any bottlenecks from the process. And that is what, we at Broadridge are really doing at the moment. And if you see what we've done in the past year alone, we made direct connections in 9 new markets and really improving the voting windows and the visibility of investors of, how they can vote, when they can vote, and what actually happened to their vote, even in markets that traditionally didn't have to do that. So it's really an exciting time within the market. It's a really exciting time to be a retail shareholder.
Yeah.
And we're on the cusp of even better shareholder engagement.
Yep. And so we need to press on. Thank you so much, guys, for your presentations and all your insights. And thank you to this group for your input as well. Dr. David Koh's book is available, The Unsustainable Truth. You can also get more information on rethinking choices. And then Wilfred can be found at Broadridge, and both are on LinkedIn. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending today's session, and on behalf of Investor Meet Company, good morning to you all.